It's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there.
Good evening, everybody. You're watching America First. My name is Nicholas J. Fuentes. We have a great show for you tonight. Very excited to be back here with you tonight on Monday. We have a lot to talk about tonight, lots to get into. Big show. Our featured story tonight, we're talking all about the government shutdown, which is apparently days away from ending. And, you know, I really didn't want to talk about the shutdown. It's been going on now for almost, what is it? I think it just hit 40 days. So it's the longest shutdown in history. It's been going on for over a month. I don't think I've even done one show about it. And the reason being is because it's fake. Everything about it is fake. The stated reasons for the shutdown are fake. It is the definition of political theater. And I said that when it started, and at various times, I think we might have done at least one or two shows about it now that I'm thinking about it. But at various times, I felt obligated to cover it. I felt obligated to talk about it because it's obviously a big deal and it is going on. And it's more of a big deal for some than others. Beneficiaries of entitlements, government workers, people that are most directly affected. But I resisted the urge for the most part because I felt that it was not actually a real story. Sort of a distraction. Maybe not intentional, but that's what it is for us. And so tonight, we're going to talk about the finality of it, or the finale. It's now over. The Senate has finally passed a measure that happened just hours ago. It will go to the House on Wednesday. The president will sign it shortly after that, and then the shutdown is over. And what is interesting about the shutdown is they have basically admitted the entire thing was fake. So I said at the outset 40 days ago, the whole thing, it's not happening for the reasons they're saying it is, which is these Obamacare subsidies. From the beginning, I said this is a demonstration. It's an exercise. That's all it is. It is meant specifically for the election, and we'll talk about that. But more than that, this is a gesture by the Senate Democrats and by the entire Democrat Party to their base. They want to demonstrate for their voters and for their people that they're standing up to Trump. That's why they did it. It actually had nothing to do with the subsidies. It had nothing to do with anything they said it was about. And we now know that because the ending of the government shutdown is completely arbitrary. Just as arbitrary as how it started, it ends the same way. They didn't get what they said they wanted, which was the subsidies. That's not even part of the deal that ended the shutdown. And they didn't get any other concessions either. So they started it and then later said it's about the subsidies. They ended it. They didn't even get the subsidies. They got nothing. So they shut the whole thing down. They're opening it up and they got nothing in return. So the whole thing, again, it was for its own sake. It was for a political purpose. And we'll talk about that tonight. We'll talk about why that is. We'll talk about, how the whole thing came to an end, because there seemed to be a little bit of disagreement among the Democrats about whether to end it and under what conditions. So we'll discuss all that. That'll be our main story. We'll get back a little bit into the news tonight. We're also going to talk some more about the ongoing Tucker cost and the backlash to the interview. It seems to be winding down. This may be the last show that we talk a great deal about it, at least that we talk about some of the major developments. It's now been exactly 2 weeks since my interview with Tucker broke the internet, and like I said, things seem to be quieting down a little bit. But I do want to talk in particular about a comment from Ben Shapiro on a recent podcast, because, this really sums it up. Shapiro has really taken the mantle of opposition against me and Tucker and Candace and even Megyn Kelly for that matter, and all the mainstream conservative pundits that have been criticizing Israel's conduct in Gaza anybody that would characterize themselves as Israel critical. And he's really been lighting me up the past couple weeks, saying that I'm a Nazi and I hate women and, you know, I'm an extremist and a racist and no one should talk to me. But this weekend, Shapiro did an interview with Trigonometry, which the name is totally ridiculous, but it's this podcast with these two pro-Israel intellectual dork web type guys. And there's this clip going viral from the interview. It actually had nothing to do with the Tucker thing, about me, any of it. He's talking about Zohran Mamdani and the recent mayoral election in New York City. And the talking points about this election, of course, is that Mamdani was propelled into office because of his campaign, which was focused on affordability. And that's the big question. The economy, ever since the COVID recession, has not been great. Inflation's been high, job market's been tight. Everybody knows that. It's been very tough. Prices went up dramatically and stayed high. And although the rate at which prices have been increasing has slowed down, the prices are still higher than where they were. And wages have not gone up. Job market's not great. Other expenses are getting really out of control. Things like insurance, interest rates remain high. We're familiar with this. And so in comes a Democrat that says, well, we're just going to make things cheaper. And so this is what everybody has been talking about since the election is why has Trump and why are the Republicans not talking about this problem? They won on it in 2024. They have not yet delivered. And it seems to be the case that they had a terrible showing in part because of this. And so Shapiro addressed this specific subject on this interview. And like I said, this clip went viral. It's gotten millions of views on Twitter. He said, well, we have this mindset in America that if you can't afford things like housing or whatever, that the system is the problem. He says, but you're the problem. He said either the policy needs to change or you need to move. So in other words, if you can't afford to live in the city or the town that you grew up in, well, you need to move somewhere else. We're not going to help you get an affordable quality of life. We're not going to help you bring prices down or wages up. The government will not help you. You need to go somewhere else. He said, that's what America's all about. If you can't afford things, you got to go and work on an oil rig or something. Go somewhere else. You're somebody else's problem. We're not looking out for you. And is that not the most distilled example of the problem? Is that not the epitome of the issue here? Here you got a guy. His wife isn't even from here. He married an Israeli in Israel. He wants our government to send billions of dollars to Israel. He wants our government to go to war for Israel. He visits Israel all the time. Israel visits us. And for the past 2 weeks, during the election, that's all he has been preoccupied with, is people are criticizing Israel, people are hating Jews, people are being anti-Semitic. His own party gets destroyed because cost of living is too high. And after this happens, they're doing their autopsy. How did the Republicans do so badly? You're the problem. It's not us. It's not the party. The party that only takes care of Israel and the Jews and anti-Semitism. No, that's not the problem. If you want affordable living and you voted for the party talking about it and doing something tangible to deliver it, no, you're the problem. You're stupid. You're ignorant. And at the end of the day, you're the problem. You need to move somewhere else if you can't afford a house. That's the Republican. Scratch that. That's the Israel First Republican prescription. So we'll talk about that. It'll, I think, put a nice bow on everything we've been discussing the past couple weeks. That's going to be our news for the night. Kind of a slow day, aside from the government shutdown. Before we do that, I want to remind you to smash the follow button on Rumble, smash the like button, leave a comment, let me know what you think about the show. Check out our store, Fuentes.store. We have the Wang Half t-shirt. These things are selling like crazy. This is our best seller. Wang Half t-shirt, Fuentes.store. We also have the hats, Make sure to get them. You got to buy them early. If you want them for Christmas, get them now. You might not even get them by Christmas, honestly. I've been very frustrated. Look, we do all the fulfillment ourselves, and we're selling way more of these than we thought we would, so we're a little bit behind because we do all the fulfillment. This is not like a service where some company, you get the order, they make it, they send it to you. We have to pre-order these, and the company needs to get the fabric and everything like that. I'm told this is like very difficult, so we're trying to get up to speed with it, but if you want to get them at any time in the holiday season, buy them now. Fuentes.store. Subscribe to the website, americafirst.plus. $15 a month to get access to the whole archive. Every show I've ever done, people are loving watching the old stuff. And $100 a month, our Ultra membership. You get access to a group chat with me. I've been very active in there lately. I dropped my fall playlist in there this weekend. I might be dropping that on Telegram later this week for the rest of you freeloaders. But I'm in there basically doing voice notes every other day, giving people the inside baseball. You can ask me anything in there. That's americafirst.plus. I apologize. I'm a little bit late, but my hair, you know what? It's actually looking good now. But the reason it took me a minute to start is because my hair was the hair was not hairing today. I think it's getting too long. I got to get it cut. It's been a minute since I had a wardrobe malfunction, but I was getting ready to start the show and my hair was such a disaster. I was like, I can't go live looking like this. I look terrible. So I had to mess with it. I had to play with it for a little while. It's just too long though right now. But anyway. All right. I lost a pumpkin. A pumpkin was a casualty of the wardrobe malfunction. I had to destroy one of the pumpkins in anger. I love that yellow pumpkin, but it's now scattered across the floor. All right, but we're going to move on. We're going to get into our show. We actually got a few things to talk about tonight. I want to get into the government shutdown. That's the big news. I want to talk about the Shapiro clip, but there's a few things. There's many things to get into. And before we even get into the news, I want to talk a little bit about this Dave Portnoy situation. I think this is very important to talk about. And I'm not sure how many of you have seen this or heard of this. I think it went pretty viral. And this is not a huge story, but I do want to address it because this is really important. Over the weekend, there was an incident. I think this was in the South. This was at Mississippi State University. Okay, so this was in Mississippi. Dave Portnoy, who is Jewish, pro-Israel, liberal, he was doing a pizza review at Mississippi State. I guess he was going to a football game or a sports game down there. And he's in the middle of a pizza review, and some kid runs up and says, "Fuck the Jews and fuck you." And he throws a bunch of coins at Dave Portnoy and runs away. And Dave Portnoy's crew caught this on camera. They were in the middle of a pizza review, so they were already recording. They caught this. They posted it. And they said, "Can somebody identify the guy that said this?" And the guy got picked up. This is from the local press. It's a 20-year-old student. It said Starkville police arrested a 20-year-old Mississippi State University student on a misdemeanor charge of disturbing the peace after anti-Semitic comments directed toward Barstool Sports founder Dave Portnoy could be heard in a video on Friday. In a video posted on X, someone could be heard saying, "F the Jews, F you, Dave Portnoy." The student was arrested and released on a $2,500 bond. He withdrew from MSU on the afternoon of November 10th, according to a university spokesperson. So that was earlier today. According to the incident report, the police department was made aware of that video circulating online. The police department said in a statement, quote, "Every person has the right to feel safe and respected in our community. Offensive words alone are protected, but when behavior disrupts a public event or risks violence, the police department will take steps to help maintain safety and security." And the reason I wanted to talk about this tonight is because this kind of thing is really a problem. And before anybody says I got the call or, somebody put me up to this, we do have to be very careful here. First of all, and I'm not saying this to pander to Jews, I'm not saying this to pander to Israel or to liberals or anything. There is a fine line here. There is a fine line between when we are talking about our politics and, of course, the political reality is this country is controlled by a Jewish oligarchy. That's a fact. It is a fact that when you look at the biggest individual donors to the presidential campaigns, probably more than half of them are Jewish. I haven't looked at the list of names. I don't have it off the top of my head. But when you're looking at Miriam Adelson, when you're looking at Michael Bloomberg, when you're looking at the George Soros, these are the types of people that are pouring money into the campaigns, the super PACs, get out the vote. When you're looking at media, the Ivy League universities, it's no secret that we have a Jewish oligarchy filled with Jewish billionaires, and they frequently and often put Israel and the Jewish nation ahead of America. It's a big problem. It's also a separate, maybe not altogether separate, but it's distinct, although contained in that, which is the Zionist issue. It's under the umbrella of the Jewish oligarchy. You have many Jewish billionaires that in particular put Israel first. And their job basically is to bribe the politicians to keep sending foreign aid and deploy our military to defend Israel's interests. They're trying to get regime change at Harvard. They're trying to get regime change at the Heritage Foundation because they disagree with how the administration of these different institutions are handling the ongoing discourse about Israel and October 7th. And we could talk about these things and we could get fired up and we can do things about this. My prescription for these problems is that we need to get involved. We need to call on Christians and white people who are not Jewish to start getting courageous. White billionaires, white millionaires, Christian billionaires, Christian millionaires. We need to call on our own people to stand up to Jewish bullies and assert our interests. And we also need to call on the young people and the ordinary people to get involved in the institutions. If you don't like how the table is set, you have to turn over the table. So if you have power, you need to stand up to the entrenched interests. And if you don't have power, you need to acquire power. Get rich, get connected, go to a good school, get involved in politics. We are trying to save ourselves from this problem. And there's a fine line between doing that and what this is. Because this is nothing other than what you could accurately describe as just verbal abuse. Going up to somebody and saying, "F that person," in public, and saying, "F the Jews and f you," that actually doesn't change anything. It's rude. It is disorderly. This is not how we're supposed to behave. I don't think that we can hold a society together if this is what it's going to turn into. And you could go through a number of different problems. We have a black crime problem. We need the prosecutors, we need the mayors to arrest people regardless of their race. We need to put the cops where the crime is happening. If that's in a black neighborhood, then so be it. But you wouldn't say that the solution is to go up to black people in the street and say, "Hey, F you, black person, F you, N-word." That doesn't solve anything. And it's not nice. And it's not Christian. And I would say it goes further than that. Maybe for some of you out there, you might say, well, we're right to be angry and we're right to take out our anger on people like Dave Portnoy. Certainly, I would say on my show, f Dave Portnoy, absolutely. But when you do these kinds of things in real life, let's be very clear about what this tends towards also. If people start to say, we're going to go out there and we're just going to start throwing stuff at and heckling Jewish people, If we say that's okay, maybe this you could say, get a thicker skin. Nobody was hurt. It's not really a big deal. Somebody said F you in the street. A lot of people might say that by itself is not a problem. If you start to say this is funny or this is cool or this is okay, who's to say that the next time it happens, somebody doesn't run up and punch him in the face? Now you got a really big problem. Who's to say that if somebody runs up and punches somebody in the face, the next person isn't going to go and maybe hit somebody with a baseball bat? Now that's a real problem. And that's not the type of society that I want to live in. I don't want to actually live in a society where people who are Jewish or happen to be Jewish are getting punched or beat up, and quite frankly, even heckled for that matter. People should, generally speaking, and I say this as a content creator also, but also just in general, people should be able to go and live their private lives without being verbally or physically assaulted. And the moment that you start to say that you forfeit that privilege because of your politics, we're living in open warfare. And it cuts both ways. And I don't think that's any type of civilized way to live. That people should be getting screamed at or heckled or punched or beat up. I do actually believe in civility. And I think that's what America's about. I think that's Christian. And so I would caution everybody, because don't get me wrong, I don't like Dave Portnoy. I think he's a poser. I think he's an asshole. I think he's a traitor. But if I saw him in the street, I wouldn't run up on him and yell, "Fuck you." Honestly, I wouldn't confront him at all. And if I did, I would be polite. I don't think that's the right thing to do. I don't think that's the right way to conduct ourselves, and I can't approve of it. And I think that's bad in principle, but I'll tell you something else. And this is what I was maybe alluding to earlier when I say it goes further than this. Maybe you're unconvinced. Maybe you're angry. Maybe you're pissed off. You say, well, who cares? Somebody said F you. They need to get the kind of heckler's veto. They need to get the mob veto over their behavior. If you're unconvinced, maybe you think this kind of thing is okay and I can't convince you otherwise. Let me tell you where else this is going. You start to go and harass people in the street like this, and it actually gives them, the political enemy, ammunition to go after us. Because you know what? We're right about what we're saying. We are right. If Jewish people like Larry Ellison are buying TikTok so that they can ban criticism of Israel, that's a huge problem. Like, we're right. There's a perfect example of organized Jewish influence that everybody can recognize as a conflict of interest. It is averse or adverse, better said, it's adverse to a culture of free speech. And this is an instance of pro-Israel Jewish lobbying and regulatory institutional capture of private public institutions. It's a problem. And everybody would be on our side. Everybody, by the way, this is factual. It happened in reality. Everybody can get behind this, that's a problem. But the moment that people start to go out there and say the message is F the Jews and we're going to heckle and attack people in real life, then you lose everybody. Because nobody supports that. The moment that you start to cross that line, that very fine line, and I don't think it's that fine, but it's a hard line. The moment that you cross that line, you lose everybody. You tell people we don't want a genocide in Gaza, they're with you. You tell people we don't want AIPAC in Congress, they're with you. You tell people that we want to be able to criticize Israel on social media, they're with you. We don't want Jewish billionaires buying TikTok in collusion with the government to censor speech, they're with you. But the second that some punk, some asshole goes out there and starts yelling, hey, F the Jews, and throwing stuff at people because they think it's funny, then you lose everybody. And everybody says, yeah, that's not cool, actually. That is actually a good example of so-called anti-Semitism. If you're attacking someone in public for being Jewish, you kind of lose that card. And that by that card, I mean, oh, so you're saying it's anti-Semitic to criticize Israel? That is ridiculous. But if you're trying to get people to defend, oh, you're saying it's anti-Semitic to say fuck the Jews and throw stuff at them in public? It's like, well, that kind of is. That is prejudice. That is actually not cool. That's immoral. And everybody's going to say, yeah, like, no, we're not with you on that. And not only are you going to lose popular support, but you're going to taint the legitimacy of the rest of the arguments. And what's more, that just goes in the folder for the ADL. When the ADL goes to Congress and says there's been 50,000 anti-Semitic incidents this year, that's a real one that they can use, and they will use it. They will browbeat you forever, and they will use that to bolster censorship. They will use that to bolster legislation. They will use that to bolster all kinds of things. So we need to be very clear. We are not about that. If you're doing that, you are not with us. So this kid, this 20-year-old, do I think he should be charged? I don't know. I don't think that's really a crime, what he did. I generally consider that to be protected by free speech. And should he be thrown out of the university? At least 20 years old. I mean, 20-year-olds do stupid stuff. I don't know that his future should be ruined for that. But you're not helping us. I don't know the name of the guy that did this, but whoever did this, you are not helping us. You are hurting us. And if you are hurting us, if you are an obstacle to our objectives, if you're making us look bad, we want nothing to do with you. It's one thing if you get canceled unfairly. It's one thing if you're helping us. We will circle the wagons. We will help you. But if you, because of your emotions, because of your impulsivity, because of your lack of prudence and temperance, if you go and do stupid stuff like this, you're helping the enemy, you're doing something indefensible, we cannot help you. We cannot defend that. And everybody needs to be absolutely crystal clear on this, because mark my words, this kind of shit, it will be used against us. And like I said, I don't support it in principle. I don't support it by itself. I'm not just saying, oh, we can't do that because it'll make us look bad. No, this is asshole behavior. And people should, I've never been an advocate for harassing people in public like that. That's not cool. Okay, and we do need to draw some boundaries on that. I saw Ian Carroll say something similar, and I didn't watch the whole video, but a lot of people gave him a hard time. I think his heart's in the right place, and he's totally correct. We do have to draw a hard boundary on that. You know, I'm in favor of telling the truth. I'm in favor of infiltrating the institutions. I'm in favor of using political speech, using the political system. I'm in favor of self-defense, actually. But I'm not in favor of this kind of stuff where you go and make an asshole out of yourself in public, harassing people, kids, families, you know, people in public throwing stuff at them. That's not cool. And it's a slippery slope. That's not a game you want to play, not a path you want to go down. You can't defend it. And again, it's always used as ammunition, and rightfully so, and rightfully so. If Mark Levin was throwing stuff at white people in public, we would be up in arms too, and we'd be justified. So, you know, we have to call that out and say that's not okay. You can disagree with Dave Portnoy, you know, and you could even go up and say, you know what, Dave Portnoy, I think you're a real asshole. I think you're wrong to be pro-abortion. I think you're wrong to be pro-Israel, but you can't be throwing stuff at him, and you can't say fuck the Jews. You know, our message is not anybody. Our message is we love America. We love Americans. Our message is positive, not negative. We need to be very clear about this. Because the second that you start to slum it with that kind of stuff, it really has a tendency to drag everybody down. And if you don't like this, good, leave. If you don't like that message, good, because you'll only be a problem in the future. We talked about this not too long ago when there was that guy who was picked up. He was making death threats against everybody, and he was extradited to Florida. He was making death threats on social media from Texas, and he was also attacking me. I had blocked him because he was saying something like, you know, why aren't you blaming them for Charlie Kirk, and why aren't you calling for violence? And if that guy had ever hurt anybody and he was a fan of mine, it would be over. It'd be the Christchurch playbook. They do this all the time. I've been doing this for 10 years. And I've seen it happen. I've been around the block. That's how they destroyed the alt-right in 2017. A lot of those people, they got reckless, they got careless, they got way too aggressive, they got nutty. And honestly, a lot of them weren't Christians, so they didn't have that moral center. And they made a lot of unforced errors that allowed everybody to come down really hard and censor and vilify and the rest of it. We need to be on the right side of this. So I saw that, and I saw some people expecting me to come on the show and defend all that stuff. I'm not going to defend that. So it's maybe important to say this after 2 weeks has passed from the Tucker interview. This doesn't take away from the fact that all of their attacks on me have been unfair. It doesn't take away from the fact that a lot of that is a deflection. But we do have to be self-policing. And a lot of people say, what's the boundary? The boundary is when you start saying, screw a whole group of people and we want harassment and violence because we don't. What we want is a level playing field. We want people with reasonable and justifiable positions to be able to get jobs and work in politics, to work at the Heritage Foundation, to be elected to Congress. We think congressmen should be able to say they don't want to give money to Israel. These are the kinds of things that we're playing for. This is what is defensible. This is how we solve our problems. We don't solve our problems by, attacking people like that. So, and I'm not saying that to virtue signal. I'm saying that because if we want this political movement of ours, because we are a team, if we want this to have legs, if we want this to go the distance, we can't give into this sort of thing and the heckler and the mob mentality that says, oh, we're just going to go and attack them. No, trust me, that is the surest way to give them ammunition and then bring down the hammer on all of us and make us all look bad by association. We can have no tolerance for that. So I just want to say that at the very beginning, because like I said, a lot of things to cover. There's been kind of a lot of developments in the past couple weeks, and I think that's a very important thing to say. It tends to be, it feels like a chore. It's not the righteous indignation that we're used to. It's not fun. That's not really the battle, but it is something that we need to nip in the bud and sort of take care of. And I hope you understand where I'm coming from on that. And if you don't, I want nothing to do with you. But that's that. I do want to move on. I want to get into the situation with Ben Shapiro and this comment that he made on trigonometry. Like I said, some of the backlash from the Tucker Carlson interview, it seems to be winding down a little bit. So I don't know how much more will happen. There's a few things that we're watching with this, like, for example, the Heritage Foundation and whether Kevin Roberts will be fired or not. And of course, the whole situation in the Middle East. I'm sure we'll revisit that at some point this week, specifically in Lebanon and in Iran, possibly in Iraq. There's been some rumbling about that. But tonight, I want to give a little epilogue on all of it, and I want to talk about this comment that was made. Of course, Ben Shapiro has been on a tour in the past 2 weeks, and they all have. They have all been working overtime, the $7,000 Club, the Unit 8200, the Shills. We're talking about Joel Berry, Seth Dillon, Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin, Josh Hammer. They have been working overtime. They've been earning their shekels, earning their pieces of silver, betraying our country. They've been making the rounds, doing interviews, shows, posting on Twitter, because they recognize that Nick Fuentes is broken containment. For 10 years, they tried to censor me, blacklist me in order to squelch and suppress my ideas, and they objectively lost that battle. The censorship is over. Comedy was legalized. Cancel culture's finished. All of that stuff is done. As a result, I have been surging throughout the year. My show is bigger than ever. I've been doing huge shows. And the more that I do big shows, the more legitimacy I gain. I'm popular, so I have the raw force of millions of fans, but I also now have legitimacy. I have real institutional figures that are willing to sit down and give me a fair hearing. And in doing so, they do legitimize me. And it's not just me doing the shows, but it's also my followers getting into government, the administration, the White House, the think tanks, Congress, in high-level media positions. I have fans or sympathizers everywhere. And so, as I said, in response to this crisis, there's been this damage control effort. Shapiro's been leading the charge. And we talked about this, I think, on Friday or Thursday. They're all saying something very specific, which I want to make clear. I want to reiterate this just briefly before we move on. They are all saying the exact same thing, and this is their playbook. It's not implicit. This is not a guess. This is not inside baseball. This is what they are broadcasting is their playbook. Like I said, Ross Douthat in the New York Times, he wrote this in an opinion piece, I think on Friday. So you can go and read this. And Shapiro was saying this, and Levin said this at the Republican Jewish Coalition. Their playbook is as follows. They acknowledge that they lost the battle to contain the ideas. You could say they lost the battle over the information space. They tried for 10 years and even longer to make it so that if you criticized Israel or talked about the lobby, that you could not have a social media platform. You would literally be banned permanently on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. And if you were banned from social media, you could never reach a massive audience because that's where people get their ideas. So they tried that. And for 10 years, they literally tried to suppress on the whole internet in all of America anybody who would talk about these things. And they failed because now everybody's talking about these things. No one's being censored. And it seems increasingly that nobody is even being blacklisted. So they acknowledge, they say, okay, we tried to censor the whole internet and we lost. The internet is too powerful. And at the same time that they were making arguments about free speech, which is a logical end of being a constitutional conservative, they were also trying to have it both ways and censor the things they didn't like, colluding with the left. So maybe that was never going to last. So they say, we've lost that battle. We're in retreat. What is the next line of defense? If we're conceding the internet and the information space, what's the next line of defense against the anti-Semites, the Groypers, those that would criticize Israel? Again, they're not being subtle. They're explicitly saying the next line of defense is gatekeeping. And it's funny how for all of us, these are pejorative terms, but for them, this is their MO. This is their mode of operating. We tried censorship. No, that didn't work. Let's try gatekeeping. They say it like it's a good thing. And in particular, they're saying, if we lost the open internet, what we can control, the bottleneck that we can still control, is the actual institutions. Which institutions? The political institutions. They're saying we can't control everybody's opinion on Facebook and YouTube because there's billions of people on Facebook and YouTube. They're saying, but we can control who gets a job in politics. Okay, fine. Maybe millions of people on the internet hate us. All right, whatever. But we can apply pressure on the bottlenecks of the think tanks, the political campaigns, and the congressional offices. They said that's what we can control. We can control who gets those jobs and who gets promoted in those institutions. So we don't have to cancel everybody that says something critical of Israel on the internet. We only have to cancel the people that are critical of Israel on the internet that apply to the Heritage Foundation, that apply to the administration, the Trump administration, that work on congressional campaigns and in those offices. How are we going to control that? With our money. We can take the money, the donors, the all these different funding mechanisms. We can take the money from the super PACs, the campaigns, the think tanks of those that will not police those whom they hire. They said that's like the next stage. So they're saying, in other words, listen very carefully. When Mark Levin and Shapiro go out there, they say, we're not going to cancel Tucker because we're not saying he should be banned on YouTube. We're only saying that no one in politics should talk to him and no one in politics can defend him. Because if you do, we will fire you. And they say, how do they say that? They say, that's the difference between no enemies in the right and a moral conservatism. Moral conservatism. In other words, there are some who would say the Republican Party's a big tent. Tucker has a right to speak. Consequently, people have a right to listen. And he's not our real enemy. The left is our enemy. That's the no enemies to our right, no enemies in the right mentality. They're creating this dialectic, this dichotomy. That's the position of like Matt Walsh. That's a position of, let's say, Tucker himself. That was the position of Kevin Roberts. Tolerating Tucker, tolerating people that like Tucker. Shapiro and Levin are saying, no, we need a moral boundary. We need a moral conservatism. We need to gatekeep the coalition, police the extremists in our own group, like Bill Buckley did. And we need to purge anybody that is sympathetic to the Israel critical group. And so what does that mean? It means we're not going to say Tucker should be banned on YouTube because they can't control YouTube, but we can ban anybody that likes Tucker from Heritage. We can ban anybody that likes Tucker from Claremont, from American Mind, which they publish, from I Am 1776, from The Blaze, from Passage Press, from the Trump administration at the personnel office. And this is how they're having their cake and eating it too. They're saying, we're not canceling him. We're only canceling him. We're not saying he can't talk on the internet. We're just saying that anyone that likes him can't have a job. But why are they saying that? It's because they lost. They're acting like they're giving us this. No, you're not giving us this. You fucking lost. You tried to make people like Tucker lose their platform. You lost. You fired him from Fox News. You tried to keep people like me banned on YouTube. You lost. I'm now allowed on people's shows as a guest on YouTube. So if they had it their way, they probably would censor Tucker. But they're saying, oh, we're not going to cancel him. Yeah, because you can't cancel him in that way. So they're retreating to the next line of defense, which is, we just want to fire anybody that sympathizes. And that's how they're going to gatekeep the GOP. Power. And that's the operative word. This is what I've always been telling my followers. We can rile everybody up. A lot of people watch the show, but the people in power don't really care if you're riled up, if you're not doing anything. You see? There might be millions and millions and millions of people that are pissed off and fired up, and they're watching the show and they're like, amen, Nick. And they don't love that that's happening, but they don't really care as long as you people stay where you are. If you're angry as hell, but you're in Dubuque, Iowa, or you're in Aurora, Illinois, or Peoria, if you're out in Lafayette, Indiana, or Janesville, Wisconsin, or whatever, and you're not in politics, as long as you're still going to work, paying your taxes, and voting Republican, they could give a shit how mad you are or what shows you watch. They might not love it. You know, it's not ideal, but they don't mind because you don't have power. You see the difference? And where does power come from? It comes from the government. And who runs the government? Don't say the Jews. Who runs the government? Elected officials and their staff and their appointees. Okay? The president is elected, and what does he do? The president appoints secretaries to run the departments and agencies, and those political appointees hire an undersecretary chief of staff. And those people bring in people you've never heard of, low-level people, and those people actually make policy at Homeland Security, at Health and Human Services, at Department of Agriculture, Transportation, Labor, okay? They make policy. Who else? Elected officials in Congress. But the politicians in Congress don't write the bills. Who writes the bills? Their legislative director. And who creates the messaging? The comms director. And where do the comms directors come from? They come from Daily Caller. They come from Washington Examiner. They come from the media in D.C. or the circuit. Where do the legislative directors come from? They come from the think tanks, Heritage, Claremont, you name it, Federalist Society. You see? So if power comes from the state, and the state is made up of elected officials, which is sort of like an iron triangle of lobbyists, think tankers, and special interests, we want to get in the middle of that process. That's what's dangerous for them. In a word, let's put it very simply and in a digestible way. You can be mad about Israel on Twitter. It doesn't matter because the war in Gaza keeps going and America keeps supporting it. But if you have actual people working in the State Department and in the National Security Council and in the Department of Defense, if they're drafting memos and a strategic doctrine, a national strategic plan that is contrary to Israel, now Israel has a problem. If the president gets his daily intelligence briefing and he gets his options from the National Security Advisor and from the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State, and these are all people that are ideologically against Israel, now Israel has a problem. And those people will matriculate from Harvard to a think tank or something, or the administration, the Foreign Service, and eventually into one of those senior roles where their whole staff will be filled up with people like that. They don't want a government made up of, let's say, National Security Advisor Douglas McGregor with Undersecretary Elbridge Colby with Chief of Staff Dan Caldwell. They don't want that alignment. They don't want all those people to align that way. That is, in a nutshell, what they fear, and that's the next layer of defense, which is why I'm telling my people, go to college, go to Young Republicans, because from there you will go into a campaign or a think tank, and you're on a track to eventually be in like a policy-making position, or who knows, an elected official, a cabinet official in a generation. That's what they don't want to happen. Now, anyway, that is just a little recap of what we talked about last week. And Shapiro and Levin, they're pushing this line where they're saying, we've got to police our movement. And by that, they mean the institutions. Okay. Let's move on to what Shapiro said on trigonometry, because this is where it gets maybe a little more interesting. This is new. So Ben Shapiro, as part of this campaign to push this message, appeared on this show this weekend called Trigonometry. I don't really know who these guys are. I think they're from England, and they're your intellectual dork web types, you know, pro-Israel, liberal, center-right, whatever. And Shapiro is there to concern troll about me and Tucker. That's like the thrust of the show. That's why he's on the show. But he said something very interesting at the beginning, which I think we need to pay special attention to, because to me, this really encapsulates the whole problem. So they introduced the show by talking about Zohran Mamdani's victory in New York City. And what's everybody talking about with that? So Tucker Carlson does a show with Nick Fuentes a week before an off-year election, which is a bellwether for performance in the midterms and then potentially 2028. So this is a very big deal. And in the middle of this election, literally a week before the election, all the conservatives can do is bitch about this interview. So Zohran Mamdani is literally a Democrat socialist, a Muslim, an immigrant. The guy is as radical as they come. And you've got important elections in Virginia, which will determine maybe redistricting. You've got important elections in Pennsylvania, New Jersey. And all Republicans can do is talk about anti-Semitism, Israel. Could it be worse timing? You have the Republican Jewish Coalition Summit with Mark Levin and Randy Fine and Lindsey Graham screaming about how Tucker's not America First. Tucker isn't MAGA. Tucker's not Republican. And people are saying, isn't this at the minimum off message? Besides being wrong, besides being hypocritical and every other flaw with this kind of messaging, isn't it at the minimum maybe off message? Maybe we should be focusing on, the election. And further, what is this election about? The election, like all elections, is kind of like a referendum on the job Trump is doing. Like, for example, the economy. And how's that going, by the way? The affordability crisis? Inflation remains high. Interest rates remain high. Whatever you say about the economy, whatever some of the numbers show, people are in trouble. The job market is tight. People say prices are too high. They can't afford their bills. They're in the middle of a government shutdown. Healthcare premiums are about to go up. They're taking away SNAP benefits. They just took away $800 billion in Medicaid benefits. And so you'd think at the minimum, even just if they wanted to win elections, instead of bitching about anti-Semitism this week, they might want to talk about how Americans are doing. They might want to talk about how real working class and middle class Americans are doing in the economy. So the election arrives, and it's a Democrat blowout. Zohran Mamdani wins. Even if Cuomo had all of Curtis Lewa's votes, he still would have lost. And even though these are blue states, Virginia, New Jersey, Pennsylvania is usually a pretty blue state, Republicans got destroyed by a much wider margin than they lost in 2024. It's not a good sign. And so Shapiro weighs in on this on trigonometry. And they're talking about how, well, it's really easy when you're Zohran Mamdani because, well, he could just promise people free stuff. He said, so it's hard to compete with that. This is the guy that has the juvenile politics that says you can have free ice cream and free childcare and free busing and free everything. He said, and that's not how the real world works. Which, you could sort of, I sort of agree with that on some level. I think that, I'm not a socialist. I'm not a democratic socialist. And you can believe that we should speak more about affordability without necessarily prescribing more welfare and more free stuff. But then he takes it a step further. And I want to read to you, this is an exact quote from Ben Shapiro in his interview on trigonometry. This is what he says. And you tell me what's wrong with this. He says, quote, "We have trained an entire generation of people to believe that if their lives are not what they want them to be, it's the fault of systems as opposed to decisions that are in their own control. And politicians have a stake in selling that." There's some truth in that. He says a lot of people in our industry have a stake in selling that. It makes people feel good about themselves and bad about the world. And the reality is, if you want a better life, you should feel better about the world and worse about yourself until you actually, go and do the right things. Here's where it gets good. He says, if you're a young person and you can't afford to live here, maybe you should not live here. That is a real thing. We've grown up in a society that says you deserve to live where you grew up. The audacity, imagine feeling entitled to that. He says, but the reality is that the history of America is literally the opposite of that. The history of America is about going to a place where there is opportunity. And if the opportunities are limited here and they're not changing, you should really try to think about other places where you have better opportunities. So much wrong with this message. And I would say in the first place, this echoes a conversation that Shapiro had with Tucker Carlson 5 years ago, where Tucker Carlson said, there's a feeling in America that things are changing too rapidly, that we are being crushed by the creative destruction of the market, the technological innovation, immigration, free trade. It's all altering society at a breakneck pace, and it feels like Americans in the heartland, in between the coasts, are sort of an afterthought. The industry's being hollowed out, the neighborhoods are being altered, the people are being displaced. He said, and people feel like they want to live in the town where their ancestors are buried, where 3 or 4 generations or beyond of their ancestors are buried. And they're being told, just go work on an oil rig or something. And Shapiro says, well, you're not promised that. He said, all you're promised in America is the adventure of a lifetime. He got excoriated for this 5 years ago. This is still his ideology. So the message to all the people that voted for democratic socialism in New York is, if you can't afford to live in the nation's biggest city, well, get lost. You grew up in New York and you can no longer afford to live in New York? Well, get lost. Go move somewhere else. Go move to Ohio or something. Go move wherever. If you can't afford to live in LA and San Francisco and Miami, Chicago, well, go move somewhere else. That's what America's about. You don't deserve to live where you grew up. Now, let's just say first and foremost, is the irony lost on anybody that this is coming from a Jewish Zionist who says that if Israel gets in any trouble, that America needs to go and defend them? That if Israel gets into any trouble, America has to send Israel taxpayer money? So let me get this straight. If you're in America, born in America, you're an American citizen, and you're born in New York City or Chicago, the place where your ancestors lived, if you can't afford to live there, you can't afford housing or transportation or cost of living, you got to get lost then. But if you're a Jew and you live in Israel and you have missiles flying at you, well, then the solution is America has to go and bail you out? In other words, the American taxpayer has no obligation to bail out the American people. The American government has no obligation to the American people. Americans are not entitled to live in America. But Israel is entitled to all of that. If you're an American and it's not comfortable for you in New York, hey man, get lost. Don't expect the American government to help you. But if you're a Jew in Israel and you're in trouble, well, then America has to send you missiles and fight your wars and give you money. Really? Israel's healthcare is paid by America. Israel's defense is paid for by America. Israel's existence in the Middle East is guaranteed by America. The land quite literally was promised to them, and we are the guarantors of the promise. But Americans are not guaranteed their own country. Americans are not guaranteed their own city, their own town, by their government. Really? This is the problem. This is what we're talking about. This is why we are not happy with the arrangement. Ben Shapiro is a guest here. He's a child of immigrants, recent immigrants. He married an Israeli. Do you know that about Ben Shapiro? Do you know that his wife is not even American? His wife is Israeli, which means his children are Israeli. So he is truly a foreigner. What's the problem, Ben? An American wasn't good enough for you? You had to marry someone from another country, in another country. He had to move to Florida where there's all Jews there. He moved to a neighborhood, of course, South Florida is all Jewish. What's the problem? You couldn't find an American woman, couldn't get married in America? You didn't like Nashville? This is the problem. Let's spell out the problem very simply. For the Jews, they are blood and soil nationalists. It has to be Jews by blood in Israel, that plot of land. God gave it to them. And God help anybody that gets in the way. What does it mean to be Jewish? It means to have a Jewish mother. They're Jewish by birth, by blood, by genetics. According to Jewish law, you are Jewish if your mother is Jewish, and this goes all the way back to Adam and Eve, they believe. Goes right to the beginning. They believe in blood and soil nationalism in Israel. In order to secure citizenship, all you have to do is prove you're ethnically Jewish on a DNA test. It's called birthright. It's your birthright to live there. And so for Israel, they're blood and soil nationalists. They're fascists. Ben Shapiro says all the Arab Muslims need to be picked up and kicked out of Israel because this needs to be a Jewish country for Jews. It has to be here. It has to be ethnically Jewish people living here. The state has to be Jewish. It's a Jewish nation. They're Jewish nationalists. God promised them that. But then those Jewish people come here. Ben Shapiro's ancestors come from Russia. Those people come here. And for America, they say, well, this place is for everybody. You're not promised anything. This place is not for Europeans. It's not for your ancestors. Maybe you have ancestors going back to the Mayflower or Jamestown. Maybe you have ancestors going back to the Revolution. That doesn't matter. You are owed nothing. You are not promised anything. Not the land. It's not yours. America's identity doesn't have to be European or Christian. No, see, all you're promised in America is the adventure of a lifetime, which means what exactly? The free market? So if you're hungry, if you don't have health care, if you're homeless, if you're a veteran, if you're disabled, if you're a struggling mother, if you're adopted, whatever your problem is, well, you're not owed anything. You're not promised anything, and America won't take care of you. Because America isn't a community. It's not even really a nation. America's just a big jurisdiction where we all agree on the value of the US dollar. Because what does a community have? A community has an identity. A community is coherent. There's a sense of family, familiarity. There is actually a sense of shared heritage, culture, religion, values. So let's get this straight. In Israel, they have free health care. In Israel, they're promised the land. Who? The Jews. Who is promised refuge and a home and opportunity and health care and security and prosperity and defense and a way of life and community? Jews are. They're promised a real nation. But Jews come to America and they say America isn't a nation. America isn't a community. It has no shared values, religion, identity, culture, anything. And you're not owed anything and you're not promised anything. If you can't afford a house, well, hey man, buy a train ticket. Like a bum. Buy a train ticket or a bus ticket like a tramp. Because the government won't look out for you. The community won't look out for you. There isn't a community. This is just a place where we buy and sell. This is just some marketplace. That's the problem that people have. Blood and soil for me, open borders for thee. Blood and soil, fascist, Jewish nationalism for Israel, but for America, refugees welcome. Open borders. Right? The best and brightest, multiracial, working class populism, colorblind meritocracy, whatever you want to say about it, that's what it's going to be for America. That's what's implied. And here's the kicker. Here's the best part. So maybe you could say that's a double standard, but it gets better. It's not just that Israel is going to be a community and a nation with blood and soil, and they get to do these things, and America doesn't. They have one set of values for Israel, another set of values for America. Here's the best part. They expect the American government to take care of Israel, but not Americans. So if a New York City, if someone who was born in New York City says, I want the government to help me, Ben Shapiro says, you're an ingrate, you're entitled. You're only entitled to opportunity. But when Israel's in trouble, they're entitled to help from the U.S. government. If you're an American and you say, I want the government to help me, you're an ingrate, you're a spoiled brat, you're entitled, you're a millennial. But when Israel's in trouble and says, I need the American government to help me, Ben Shapiro says, you better give them the missiles. You better give them the foreign aid or Israel's. That's the part that people really hate. The double standard is obvious. It's offensive. It's hypocritical. It's insulting. That's where people say, take your dual loyalty and go home. But to add to it, what makes it truly reprehensible, what makes it truly disgusting, they're not happy with the double standard. To add insult to injury, they want America to pay for their ethno-state. America will have no community. America will have no nationhood. America has no right to an identity, a sense of belonging, a sense of looking after one another. The government has this sort of role. It's not and Israel does. No, our government will also help them. So they have their nation and ours. God promised them the land. God promised them their ethno-state, and God promised them American aid. God promised them that America's going to pay for it. So Shapiro, with his Israeli wife, Israeli kids, his Israeli loyalties, he's got one set of standards for Israel and another for us. And at the same time is going to use his citizenship to lobby for welfare for Israel, but not for Americans. For Americans, he says, get lost, buy a bus ticket, get a job. For Israel, he says, think of the hostages, think of the Jews. How much do you have to actually hate a group of people to do this to them? Seriously. Josh Hammer, who used to work for Daily Wire, says Europeans have anti-Semitism in their DNA. Mark Levin said the same thing. How much do you have to hate a people to live among them, thinking they hate you, but going and telling them, we're your closest ally, you need us, you got all your ideas from us. You don't deserve anything. You're not entitled to anything, but you have to keep paying for our country. How much do you have to hate a people to do this? Josh Hammer lives in a white country. America comes from the Europeans. Those were the settlers, the founders, the framers. Josh Hammer lives here among white people, and yet he thinks white people hate him in his DNA. But yet he gained influence here. He married someone from Israel, and he uses his influence to browbeat us and tell us, you have no identity. You didn't invent anything. You're horrible people in your bones, but you have to give us all your money and fight our wars for us. Then you start to understand, why did these people get kicked out of 109 countries? Because of behavior like this. Because of behavior like this. It's not because people are jealous. It's not because of an irrational hatred. It's because I think at a certain point, all these different polities came to realize, wait a second, you don't see yourself as one of us. You're not advocating for what's best for all of us. As a matter of fact, you don't even like us. And actually, you seem to be taking advantage of us. And if that's the case, then we need to go our separate ways. That's the story. Shapiro hates Americans. He sees Americans as useless eaters. And he can couch it any way he'd like. He can frame it any way he'd like. But look, If you're an American, I actually do believe that we have a community here. We have a nation. I disagree. You do have a right, at the minimum, to live where you grew up. You do have that right. New York City should be for the rich and for the poor. It should be for the rich and for the workers. It has to be. How could New York City exist without busboys? How could it exist without cab drivers? How could it exist without hotel workers? And where are those people going to live? They're going to go and live across the bridge. They're going to go live somewhere else. We're going to have Billionaire Island, Millionaire and Billionaire Island. What do those people even make? They're going to work in insurance, real estate, and finance. And all the slaves can go live in the slaves' quarters and commute on violent buses and violent public transit. It's insane. That's insane. Of course, the cities are where the jobs are. That's where the opportunity is. And yes, the cities should be made affordable for everybody. There should be affordable public transit. There should be affordable public services. Affordable housing. You are entitled to that. Just as the Jews feel entitled to live in Israel, New Yorkers are entitled to live in New York. Chicagoans are entitled to live in Chicago. Angelenos are entitled to live in LA. And yes, the government should take care of those people. Society should take care of its constituent members. We do not live in an open market. We live in a nation. We live in neighborhoods. We live in cities made up of people. When it should be based on shared heritage, shared identity, a shared sense of belonging, like we're all in it together. And the Jews understand that when it comes to Israel. They understand that when it comes to Brooklyn. They understand that when it comes to Surfside. But when Americans want to live in their own country, they say you're an ingrate. You're entitled. Get lost. What kind of rootless way of that is thinking? Well, what kind of rootless way of thinking is that? I guess the Jews in Israel should get lost. Seems like it's pretty expensive to set up a country in the Middle East that we're always having to defend it all the time. Why don't you get lost? You don't want to live in America because of anti-Semitism? Gee, maybe you should stop blaming the world and start blaming yourself. Stop blaming a system and start asking, what did you do wrong? Oh, you don't like living in America? Man, maybe you should go and live in Israel because, you know, the world's really about opportunity. We don't owe you anything. This is the part where people really see what's going on. And this is happening at the same time that they want to gatekeep the Republican Party. Ben Shapiro wants to claim the moral authority to gatekeep the GOP. And by the way, what is the GOP? It's the conservative party. The party that is tasked with conserving our nation, our people, our culture, our traditions, our heritage. Shapiro wants to gatekeep the conservative movement. He doesn't care about anything or anyone here. He doesn't want to conserve it. You don't like New York? Yeah, well, I don't know, go somewhere else. Oh, it's unaffordable? Yeah, well, you know, go work on an oil rig. You got to uproot and leave your community where your grandparents and great-grandparents lived, where your ancestors are buried. You've been there for 100 years? Yeah, I don't know, man. Get lost. Times are changing. This guy hates you, hates our country. He's not American in any meaningful sense of the word. And that's what people hate. Simultaneously, having no allegiance to this country, basically hating and having outright contempt for its people, but also claiming to be our moral betters and our gatekeepers and the right to lecture all of us all the time. That's the part that people really have a problem with. That's your Republican Party. Missiles for Israel, but if you can't afford a house, get lost. Yeah, well, good luck with that, Ben. Let's see how that does in 2028. affordability crisis. Hey, man, pick yourself up by your bootstraps. But at the meantime, we have to go to war with Iran. We have to provide billions of dollars in aid and more missiles. And we need $1 billion for anti-Semitism awareness and Holocaust Remembrance Day. And this is where Americans need to stand up for themselves. If you're white or not white, if you're Christian, the only reason I say white and Christian is because especially America was founded by whites. America's a Christian nation. If you're out there and you're supporting this, you're a cuck. Matt Walsh, you're a cuck. I'd be ashamed if you were my dad. You're a pathetic excuse for a man. Fuck you. And I saw Matt Walsh, who works for this little guy. I saw Matt Walsh, who works for this little guy, Ben Shapiro. He got in a little debate with Sneeko. And Sneeko is what he is. He's a Muslim. He defends Haiti. He defended Zohran Mamdani. And Matt Walsh likes to pivot to that. He says, well, Sneeko's brown. Sneeko's Muslim. Sneeko's a third worldist. Yeah, and you know what, Walsh? All those things are true. What's your excuse? You're right, Matt. Sneeko is Muslim. You're right. Sneeko is Haitian. He is non-white. What's your excuse? Here's the difference. Sneeko is taking his own side. Sneeko is Haitian. He speaks up for Haitians. Sneeko is Muslim in part because he's influenced by Malcolm X, and Sneeko's part black. He's taking his own side. And you could say what you want about that. But in principle, he's loyal to his people. What's your excuse? Enough with the deflection. Enough running cover for Israel while heaping disdain on brown people. We all see what you're doing. Matt Walsh, as much as you beat your chest about being American and being white and being Christian, you are a cuck for a Jewish Zionist who hates Christ, who doesn't like Europeans, and isn't loyal to America. And he signs your paychecks and you work for him. And you say you're personally loyal to him? You are the biggest joke, traitor, embarrassment to our people there is. What's your excuse? Seriously, people have had enough of all of these white people beating their chest about being white, being Christian. I'm American. I'm a heritage American. And yet you cannot even stand up for your own country's independence because you're terrified. Can't stand up for your own church, your own savior, who they hate. Can't stand up for your race, which they also hate. And at the minimum are apathetic about our extinction. And by the way, Matt Walsh said to, I think, Megyn Kelly, he said, well, I'm personally loyal to Shapiro. He said, Shapiro's my friend, and I'm personally loyal to him, and no one's going to make me go against him. You know what Shapiro said to Megyn Kelly a few days later? He said, personal friendships don't get in the way of my morality. If someone's being anti-Semitic, I'll call them out for it. And that's the difference between a bitch and someone who's serious. That's the difference between a slave and a master. That's the difference between a vassal and a feudal lord. That's the difference. Matt Walsh said, Ben Shapiro's my friend. I don't care that he hates America. I don't care that he hates Christ. I don't care that he's working for Israel. He's my buddy. He's my friend. I'll never betray my friend. And Ben Shapiro says, I don't care if you're I don't care if you're my friend, if you're anti-Semitic. That's the difference. Those people are serious. Those people are ruthless. You think they're your friend? Matt Walsh, you think he's your friend? Tell him what you really think about Israel. See if he's still your friend. Or maybe you don't even know. Maybe you're just ignorant. But make no mistake about it. On some level, Shapiro is what he is. Scorpion and the Frog. I'm telling you this for your information. We, Americans, need to be aware of what Shapiro is. He's not American. Shapiro's an alien. He married an Israeli in Israel, he might as well be in a colony of Israel in southern Florida. Like, the guy's not American. So we Americans need to know what we're dealing with. When affordability crisis strikes Americans, Shapiro, the Israeli, comes in and says, oh, buy a plane ticket, buy a bus ticket. And we need to say, yeah, shut the fuck up. Yeah, this is a conversation for Americans. Disregard. You need to be deported. But Matt Walsh is the real problem. Shapiro is what he is. I think he should be humanely deported to Israel. He should be humanely and comfortably deported to Israel. Matt Walsh, you need to be put under the jail. Because understand, Daily Wire, Shapiro's company, it's made up of Shapiro, Clavin, Knowles, and Walsh. And the only thing keeping them afloat is Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles, two Catholic, relatively pro-white American guys. If it wasn't for them, people would see it for what it is. If it wasn't for them, you could not conceal that it was a pro-Israel outfit. You could not conceal that it's basically the foreign press. So it's not just that he's not on our side, he's giving cover for the enemy. And so that's why this guy is really the linchpin. It's really the traitors that are the problem. I'll take an enemy over a traitor any day. You know, at least a Sneeko, a Muslim, at least even for that matter, a Jewish person, you know where they're coming from. There's something honorable. They're fighting for their own people. But a Christian that's working for the other side, what do you do with a person like that? And I'm not saying we should hurt him or anything like that, but I'm saying, well, what do we do with you, Matt Walsh? You know, we got to stop giving him quarter and giving him an excuse and saying, well, he's good on 90% of the issues. Yeah, he's a slave. That's a big one. He's Ben Shapiro's slave, but yeah, he's right about, you know, Disney Plus or whatever. He's right about the Snow White remake. He's got a great take on transgender people in sports. Who cares? He's Ben Shapiro's slave. So anyway, that's Daily Wire. We're going to move on. We're going to get into the government shutdown. We're almost out of time, actually.
All right, let's get right into it. So a lot of things to unpack here. And I'm just going to go through my notes, everything that Nick was discussing. He mentioned something about the importance of understanding how we elect certain officials, right? We elect officials and they appoint certain people, and those people are the ones that actually end up writing policy. All right, let's get right to it. Man, presidential. This is why they fear Nick Fuentes. Nick, in this entire, just this part of the show, because I'm reviewing the first part of the show just right now, and then we'll follow up on the second part of the show. But Nick is demonstrating the ability to do something that both Democrats and Republicans have been handcuffed. And we see this with Marjorie Taylor Greene. We see this with Thomas Massie. And perhaps we're seeing a lot of this with the Democrats regarding the shutdown, where you're not able to go against the grain when it comes to whatever your gang's agenda is. See, Nick Fuentes has figured out that America First is going to mean leaning towards Republican conservative policies at times, but it also may lean into some of the Democratic liberal policies at times. For example, some of the things that he ended up discussing as far as Ben Shapiro saying that, hey, you shouldn't be able to, if you can't afford it, you can't live here. Find another place to live. Nick's approach and mindset is more, no, we need to figure out how to make New York City affordable for the poor as well as for the wealthy. This is something that Democrats and Republicans have not done a good job at, because how does it come across? The Democrats, they represent the poor people. They're going to dangle social programs in their face, free this, free that. Okay, you'll vote for us. Then on the other side, you got the Republicans. They're doing everything for big business, the wealthy, tax cuts. That's on that side. But when we approach it from an America First standpoint, and we use that as our guide rail or our compass, as we navigate through, okay, what makes sense policy-wise here, what makes sense policy-wise there, when we approach it with this America First mindset, it clears up a lot of the BS. It clears up a lot of the BS, and it almost serves as a checks and balance system towards Democrats and Republicans. But let's go to what Nick mentioned in the beginning of the show, if I may look at these notes. So what he said in the beginning of the show actually reminded me of Project 2025. And it's not necessarily because of the policies, but Nick was talking about how we elect these officials and then they appoint certain officials, and the people that they appoint that we do not elect, those are the ones at the ground level that are creating and writing policy. So not even the people that we vote for, the elected officials that have terms limited by years. It's the people that they can put in office while they're there that may continue working in that position. Right? That's really the fight, because those are the people that are writing the laws. So that's something that I was not aware of, how exactly it works with Project 2025. And that's why a lot of people, I believe, have such strong feelings on whether or not we should trim certain departments in the government. Should we, a lot of presidents in the past, really all of our past presidents, at least from my political lifetime, when I've been able to vote, they've all said the same thing as far as, hey, we got to cut down, the government spending, and how I process that is we got a lot of people working in government jobs that are not necessary. We're hiring more and more people, but the results are not what we're getting. It's the value is not there based on what we're spending, based on what we're getting in return. And what a lot of people have complained about is that when you elect these officials, it's very hard for them to, like, they have these evaluations, or I'm sorry, when they appoint these officials and that work for the government, it becomes very hard to fire them, and they continue to get these raises without ever earning them in a lot of ways, because the evaluation process at the end of the year, whenever they go through with their supervisor, it's almost, this is what Project 2025 was saying, that it becomes very bare minimum for them to keep their job and even get a raise. And when we think about a lot of the government employees, whether it's the post office or any other people that we interact with, it kind of gives off that energy where it's like, I'm protected, you can't do anything, I got a government job, I'm safe. So just neither here nor there, but that's something that I never really took a dive into until I was going through Project 2025. So neither here nor there. Not that Nick was referring directly to Project 2025, but that's just what it reminded me of. But yeah, getting back to us recognizing how sharp Nick was so far on this show. Even how he presented the topic with Dave Portnoy. See, what do Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin, and a lot of the people that are trying to convince us that Nick Fuentes is a Nazi and Hitler, and even Tucker Carlson, what do they want? What do they want us to, or how do they want Nick to respond to, let's say, like a Dave Portnoy situation? I'm sure they're going to use that situation and say, hey, Dave Portnoy, somebody went up to him and said, F the Jews. I'm sure that Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin, and Ted Cruz, and whoever else on that side that's pandering to, pro-Israel, Zionist, whatever else, I'm sure they're going to use that clip and use that situation as an opportunity to say, this is what Nick Fuentes creates. This is what Tucker Carlson creates. So how does Nick respond? Yo, that's not us. And Nick has been very consistent when he talks about America First being a very non-violent party or, movement. He's very strategic in noticing that, or in just telling his followers, like, yo, we can't get into that. We have to be smarter than getting caught up in something like that. We saw how they tried to use January 6th. We see how they can use these situations to turn people off to us. Let's not make it easy for themselves. And just from a humanity standpoint, Nick mentioned, just from a Christ-like standpoint, you shouldn't be going up to anybody saying these type of things, disrespecting them like that. So that does not have room in the movement. Now, perhaps Nick is going to have to struggle with this, because some of the things that Nick does, think about some of the rhetoric that he uses. Now, Nick is intelligent to use that rhetoric to know when, I should say, to use certain rhetoric, to know that he can conduct himself in one way while he's doing his show and a different way when he's on somebody else's platform. He does a good job of that. Now, the people that he's leading, that he believes are his base followers, right, that he believes are the people that have been with him since day one, maybe when he was using even more of the inappropriate, I'm saying with air quotes, because people can decide what's inappropriate and appropriate on their own. But when he's using certain rhetoric that may rile up a person like this in the Dave Portnoy situation to go say something like he said. Now, not to say that there's any association with the Nick Fuentes, but if it's going to be able to be used against the movement, then it's something that Nick is saying people have to be very careful about. And I agree with him. I agree with him. Very strategic in how he went about that. And he was also very strategic in everything else that he said so far on the show. Let me look at the notes to see what was the next thing that he mentioned. Oh, yeah. So with Ben Shapiro, the biggest part of the show. Here, Ben Shapiro is saying that if you're a young person and can't afford to live here, move, right? And I actually got to see a clip of the video from Trigonometry. Maybe I haven't been putting a lot of the videos in the clip, so maybe I'll insert that video here. I try to get it out to y'all as soon as possible, but we'll figure that out.
If you're a young person and you can't afford to live here, then maybe you should not live here. I mean, that is a real thing. Yeah, I know that we've now grown up in a society that says that you deserve to live where you grew up, but the reality is that the history of America is almost literally the opposite of that. The history of America is you go to a place where there is opportunity. And if the opportunities are limited here and they're not changing, then you really should try to think about other places where you have better opportunities.
It is very ironic that Ben Shapiro feels comfortable telling Americans that the government has no responsibility in helping you. You're not obligated to that. The government has no responsibility in making sure that you can live and not get outpriced in the same town that you grew up in, that Nick mentioned, that previous generations, your ancestors grew up in. That Ben Shapiro was saying, so what, deal with it, right? He picks and chooses when he's going to get on his facts don't care about your feelings, unless we're talking about Israel or unless we're talking about Zionism or Jewish Americans, if we're just being totally honest and straightforward and direct. Israel can't exist without America. So Ben Shapiro, I have to ask you the question that is always asked to everybody else when discussing Israel. Does Israel have the right to exist? Because you made it very clear that the people that are living in these cities, because they can't survive on their own, that they should just move, look for another place, look for a different opportunity that suits them best and that they can live there without getting help from anybody else. So if that's the case and they don't have the right to exist or the right to live in the same place that they grew up in, I have to ask you again, does Israel have the right to exist? Let's not act as if Israel could exist for, I don't know how long. If America was not supporting, if every country around Israel that Israel has tried to mess with, and even if they haven't tried to mess with them, but let's be real, Israel has caused a lot of conflict in that region. Now, if all these countries that may have ill feelings towards Israel for whatever reason, you may argue some are justified, you may argue some isn't justified. But putting that to the side, if Israel's not capable of existing on their own, of standing on their own 2 feet without any aid from America, without any support from America, and without the rest of the country surrounding Israel, knowing that if they touch Israel, that America is going to make their life a living and breathing hell, just as Palestinians. Because we act as if there wouldn't be a lot of these other countries that would be stepping in and helping the Palestinian people to stop this genocide that Israel's committing against them. A lot of other countries would intervene, but the reason why they don't, in my opinion, is because America's sitting back and Israel's sitting back hoping that other countries intervene. That would be my opinion on it. Israel would love for another country to say, you know what, we're intervening, we're getting involved, we're going to strike Israel. Bibi Netanyahu would just use that the same way that he used October 7th. To keep the main thing the main thing. And the main thing to Bibi Netanyahu is what has always been the main thing. It's what was written in the clean break memo. It's this greater Israel plan. So once again, Ben Shapiro, going back and using your words, if you can't afford to live here, move. If you can't survive here without government assistance that you're not entitled to, then you shouldn't be here. So perhaps we should take a page out of Ben Shapiro's book and apply that to helping other countries. Perhaps America should just focus on Americans and let Israel focus on Israel. How long do you think Israel would continue to be Israel? What do you think if Ben Shapiro and a lot of Israelis are living in fear right now? What do you think would happen if America decided to make an announcement and say, you know what, we're no longer getting involved in Israel's affairs. We're going to take a step back. There's been a lot of conflict that has been created that we've participated in, been complicit at the very least. So therefore, we just want to step away from this region because we believe that the impact that we've made on this region has not been overall a positive one. We tried to figure out how to lend a helping hand, how to bring some positivity to the region. And obviously, I'm being a little facetious in saying this. But you know what? We just haven't been able to accomplish that. So we're going to remove ourselves, no different than what we removed from Afghanistan. We're going to remove ourselves from the Middle East overall as far as our aid for Israel. What do you think would happen? This is the entitlement and that creates the blind spots that a Ben Shapiro has. Because Ben Shapiro is saying these things very confidently to a non-American audience or to non-American podcasters and not getting challenged in a way that he would get challenged if he sat down with Nick Fuentes. That's why Ben Shapiro will never sit down with Nick Fuentes, because it'll become very clear based on actual things that have occurred that Ben Shapiro has said, that Ben Shapiro has done, that Ben Shapiro has aligned himself with. Who's the sane American first person and who's the person that wants to manipulate us into thinking that even if he says, oh, I don't think America should, Israel doesn't need America's money. You just say that. You just say that. And what's worth more than the money, because Ben Shapiro may be right regarding the money, but the money is minimal. The money is minimal. What Israel needs is big bro standing behind little bro as little bro talks all the ish in the world, knowing that behind him, he has big bro, which is bigger than all of the other bros. I don't need to keep telling y'all about this. Y'all understand what I'm saying. So then Nick went on, or I should say before that, I kind of skipped over this. What I thought Nick was also very sharp with. Mark Levin, Randy Fine, and Lindsey Graham. They're making such a big deal, this Jewish Republican coalition. They're making such a big deal about Nick sitting down with Tucker Carlson to the point where they spoke about Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson more than they spoke about this New York City mayoral election. Curtis Sliwa, I believe, received like 8%. I believe it was less than 10% of the votes. The Republican nominee received 8% of the votes. Cuomo, which a lot of Republicans were pushing. Cuomo, it's kind of wild because I thought, he was hated by both sides. And then you have Mamdani. So in an election where you have, based on what y'all are saying, this socialist jihadist, right? This anti-Semite Mamdani, that's what y'all are saying. You have him running, he wins. Andrew Cuomo gets the, what about 40%? And then Curtis Sliwa, the Republican candidate, gets about 8%. And y'all are making a bigger deal about Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes than you are in perhaps helping Curtis Sliwa win an election. This is what makes me also think about, like, is all this just done? Like, is this just a play? Like, is common sense just, like, does it just leave the room when we're discussing Israel? Like, what happens when it comes to these America First, quote unquote, conservatives, right? They'll get on stage and say, Tucker's not MAGA. Well, is MAGA not supporting the elections? Is MAGA, just letting Mamdani win and then complaining and trying to fear monger the rest of the country into, oh my God, we got a jihadist as mayor. Is that what MAGA represents? Nick was very smart when it comes to this. Y'all are focusing on me. Y'all are focusing on the wrong things. And that's why everybody's disappointed with Democrats and Republicans. But just to stay on Republicans, because you're focused on the wrong things. That is our biggest complaint. Think about what Nick Fuentes calls out all the time. You're focusing more on Israel than you're focusing on America. You're talking about what makes you so upset about Tucker Carlson interviewing Nick Fuentes. Let's be honest. It's his views on Israel. It's not his policy in any other situation than his views on Israel that you have a problem with. So you allowed that to get in the way of y'all talking about what you should have been talking about, which is these elections in Jersey and New York, which you just got destroyed in. Touche, Nick. Touche. Nick goes on and he actually is bringing about, you could tell he's moving towards a very unifying message. Now, whether people believe it, that's what he's saying. That's what I'm getting from it. And I think it's a combination of Nick understanding the potential of the position that he's in and the opportunity that he's created. The opportunity that he's created for himself, but also matched with where the country is right now. It's almost like the perfect fit. This is why they're so scared of Nick Fuentes, of Tucker Carlson, and they were scared of some of the things that Charlie Kirk was questioning as well. No different than Candace Owens, Dave Smith, a lot of the people that are speaking out on some of these things. Nick said, no matter if your roots go back to Jamestown. Now, I went to school at William and Mary on Jamestown Road, right down the street from where he's referring to in Jamestown. And I thought that was an interesting one. Hold on. I thought that was an interesting one to mention. And let me look this up. Wasn't that the first slave ship? One of the first slave ships? Did the first slave ship arrive in Jamestown? The first documented arrival of African slaves in the English colony of Jamestown, Virginia, occurred in 1619. So it was interesting, I thought, for Nick to mention that. I don't know if Nick's just a history buff, but I thought that was very interesting for him to mention it because he said, I don't know if I'm just reaching. Maybe I'm just reaching. Maybe I'm just turning into a groiper. I don't know. But when Nick says, even if your roots go back to Jamestown, what that told me was, oh, all right. He mentioned another situation that they were talking about where he wants white Americans to put their money up, Christian Americans to put their money up, and calling for or pushing this call to action to stand up for America first. But when he said, no matter if your roots go back to Jamestown, I'm like, oh, okay, I see what he's doing there. He's trying to unite the people. Like he's trying to, that's an olive branch. Maybe I'm seeing something that's not there. I'm sure that y'all will tell me in the comments, but I saw that as an olive branch. And it's consistent with the things that he's been saying, even though it's like he has to walk on eggshells to say certain things because he doesn't want to piss off his base. Neither here nor there. This is just my opinion. So he says that Ben Shapiro believes that we aren't owed or promised anything while we subsidize their birthright. Think about that. We aren't owed or promised anything as Americans. Americans aren't owed anything from America, the American government. And Ben Shapiro is saying this all while we're subsidizing their birthright and perhaps subsidizing a lot of the things that they do and standing up as we're the power that allows them to do anything in that region. Any and everything, right? Nick said that New York City should be for the rich and the poor. How could the city exist without the poor people? You want poor people to just live outside the city and have to bus in and all this? You need the taxi cab drivers, Nick mentioned. So all these different things, they are just putting him in a position where it's like, yo, Nick is Nick Fuentes speaking with more common sense and appealing to the masses in ways that the Democrats and Republicans haven't even appealed to them in? Think about the policy that he's pushing, the things that he's saying. It's almost as if Nick is sometimes, he'll say certain things that maybe align with more on the liberal Democrat side. Nick Fuentes cares about the poor people. We need to make sure that the city can have living conditions for the poor people as well as the wealthy. You don't hear many Republicans speaking like that. You don't hear many conservatives speaking like that. Matter of fact, you hear most of them speaking closer to Ben Shapiro, which is more along the lines of, hey, tough luck, figure it out. If you get priced out, you get priced out. This is perhaps why Nick Fuentes is getting more of a buzz, and why Tucker Carlson is taking a lot of the heat that he's taking, but also is getting a lot of the appreciation from people when he's talking about the country being unaffordable. Kids can't, we can't purchase homes. We're not having kids. We're not even getting married because we're struggling with finances so much, based on the credit card debt that we've put ourselves in, based on the environment and society that has been created by the generations before us, if we're just being direct. Is Tucker sounding like a liberal? Tucker caring about, about people, or while Ben Shapiro's just being insensitive, saying like, oh, well, I'm rich, so if you're not rich, then deal with it. This is why they fear Nick, and this is why they'll never sit down with him. I have to keep saying it. This is why they will never sit down with him, because from a policy standpoint, if they can't convince us that Nick Fuentes is a racist, misogynist, and anti-Semite that we shouldn't even give our time and attention to even listen, they know they're in trouble. Because once you listen to the policies, it's very hard to argue with what he's saying. It's very hard to argue with somebody who they're willing to call out Donald Trump, somebody that they look at as an idol, willing to call out Donald Trump, not vote for Donald Trump, and willing to use their platform to tell their followers not to vote for Donald Trump, while also being critical of the Democrats, while also liking certain aspects of, let's say, things that more liberals would push, while also looking at some of the things that the Republicans and conservatives would push. It's the most balanced approach based on the people that we see that have a lot of influence. Name a Democratic politician that has a more balanced approach. Name somebody that has had this new Tucker that we're seeing, who has had more of a balanced approach. When we look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, I have family members reaching out and texting me, people that hated Marjorie Taylor Greene, saying like, hey, I kind of like her. She was on Bill Maher. Thomas Massey. Why are the people that seem to be the most balanced hated the most by conservatives? Why are the Republicans, the conservatives that are influencers and or politicians, why are the ones that seem to have the most balanced approach and are prioritizing America before anything else? Why do they tend to be the ones that the rest of the conservatives, the neocons, are trying to make us hate the most? Something to look into. All right, so he finished off talking about the difference between Matt Walsh and Ben Shapiro. Matt cares about friends, or is hiding behind it. Oh, I'm a friend of Ben Shapiro, so I don't want to speak out and choose sides and stuff like that. Meanwhile, Ben Shapiro was sitting here saying, I don't care about friends. I got to stand on principles. This is how you know that when Nick says that Matt Walsh is a slave, he's behaving very obediently. You're behaving, the obedience says a lot. You're supposed to be Mr. America, right? Mr. America First, wearing your woodsy shirts, your lumberjack shirts and stuff like that. You're supposed to be Mr. American, right? Your energy seems to be a little bit different towards Ben Shapiro and the pro-Israel lobby than it was towards when you were creating all the documentaries and trying to make people look foolish regarding what is a woman. What is America? Maybe you should do a documentary on what is AIPAC. Instead of just having that energy towards the LGBTQ community, why don't you have it towards something that is actually impacting our government in ways far more than any LGBTQ influence? And I was getting ready to say something else, connecting certain dots there, but we'll leave it there for now. Nick finished off saying, I'll take an enemy any day over a traitor. I'll take an enemy over a traitor any day. Matt Walsh, I'm glad that he's ripping Matt Walsh, because Matt Walsh, in my opinion, I like when he's held accountable. Don't talk tough on Matt Walsh. Loves to punch down. That's what I see him talking about the Muslims, Dearborn, Michigan, him talking about black people, him talking about LGBTQ. Seems like you love to punch down. But it seems like you're scared to talk about certain things based on your boss being Ben Shapiro about the real fight. The real fight. Most people can agree that it's crazy, the things that certain people say about not even being able to tell what a woman is. Most people don't believe that boys should be playing sports against girls. It's an easy one. Most people, whether they admit it or not, will admit that, hey, this black crime issue, we got to figure this out. But what about the influence by the Zionist and the pro-Israel group led by your boss, Ben Shapiro? I guess that's not worth a discussion. All right, so let me leave it there before I can get on to the next video. Make sure that we're getting that out to y'all as soon as possible. As always, y'all know what it is, man. Appreciate y'all, appreciate y'all, appreciate y'all. I'm not taking for granted this journey that y'all have allowed me to take with y'all. I'm not taking for granted. We're going to continue to push. We're going to continue to learn. We're going to continue to push the envelope. We're going to keep pushing the envelope because we have to be courageous when it comes to having these conversations. Not fear, not fear-based, but just courageous. Being willing to have the conversations, not allowing the fear to turn us into just having a tribalist mindset. No, we're not doing that. We're not being fanatical with certain people that we follow. We're using our own common sense and understanding, doing research on our own, and figuring out how we can create a country that is best for all of Americans. Does that sound like such a far-fetched idea? So appreciate y'all, love y'all, and as always, let me know where my blind spots may be. Let me know where my bias that we all have, don't allow me to be as objective as I'd like to be. So call me out on certain things and like, subscribe, turn your notifications on, please. I always appreciate that. And leave a comment. Thumbs up, thumbs down, doesn't matter. But with the thumbs down, I would appreciate you giving me a little bit more context on exactly what I may be missing or exactly what you may disagree with. And even if you disagree, you don't have to leave a thumbs down. You could just give me some clarity and give me some information that can help me see things with a more clear perspective. So appreciate y'all, and I'll see you on the next one. Ew. It's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a nigga on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there. Let's figure out a split that's honorable and fair. Tell me where you trying to take it. Bro, I'll meet you there. 1600 Penn, Walsh, DC. Swear I saw the vision riding through the DMV. I envision prayers, but I could do VP. Hillbilly, L&G, fuck, I look like JD. Shout out my cheat code, Dave and Karen raised me. And my big bro, a nuclear family.
And they don't like that. Strong fathers in the crib, BLM for that. LBJ society created all that. Victimhood mentality, I can't embrace that. And everything they taught in school, assume it's all cap. Everything I said I'd be, I am that. Everything I said I'd be, I am that. Everything I said I'd be, I am that. Ain't no introduction, just some fun facts. In case you were wondering, I am that.
I know you heard me hit it 3 times for Dr. Umar. Shout out to Umar, man. We ain't kicking nobody when they down. And shout out to everybody that continues to show love, support, appreciating the message that I'm giving y'all along with the bro Nick's message. We gonna keep pushing, man. And shout out to the haters too, cause y'all in the comments heavy too. y'all the ones that gave me the inspiration to create this song. They kept saying like, who's the random black guy in the corner?